the haunted train. I hurried home from work. It was already dark and frosty, the month of December, after all. Since I worked in one city and lived in another, I had to travel by train. Go to work in the morning, go home in the evening. The journey took a little less than an hour. Today is Friday, the mood is upbeat. Having risen to a deserted platform, I began to wait for the train. There was not a soul on the platform. It was on the outskirts, next to the industrial zone, and here, as a rule, there were always few people, but today it is completely empty. Taking out my phone, I began to look for something on the internet. Somehow, a train quietly crept up. I was still pleasantly surprised that it, straight, jumped up 5 minutes earlier. This does not often happen. This fact only added positive, and I literally jumped into its open doors. I wanted to get warm in a warm car. It was 25 degrees outside with a huge minus. Entering the warm car, I directly felt how the mood level jumped by another 10 points. In addition, the car was completely empty. Get in wherever you want. The beauty. I'll be home soon, and there are 2 days of the weekend ahead, for which I have a lot of plans. As soon as I sat down more comfortably, the train started moving and began to pick up speed. I was about to hit the internet, but it wasn't there. All communication with the outside world was somehow interrupted on the phone. I didn't even expect such a dirty trick from my faithful Samsung. 2 SIM cards, and both are offline. Rebooted the phone, the same picture. Well, okay, this minor nuisance could not spoil my mood. I took out the headphones, turned on the audiobook, and leaned back in anticipation of the conductor. A monotonous voice hummed through the headphones, and I fell asleep. When I woke up, a thought flashed through my head. If I had passed by, my heart began to pound, and I immediately looked at the time. I've been driving for about an hour now. My station should be here now, but the train is still rushing without slowing down. Outside the windows there is night, the moon, and the forest. Some kind of endless forest to the right and to the left. There is still not a soul in the car. It became somehow uncomfortable. I looked at the electronic scoreboard with a running line, but it was empty there. I'm on the phone again. There's still no connection. I think I will go forward along the cars, and I will ask people what was the last stop. I put the phone with headphones in my pocket. I go to the next car. It's empty. I go further. I must have passed 5 half-dark carriages, not a soul. My eyes fell on the emergency button. I go up to it. I press it. A wild rattle and hiss hit my eardrums from the speakers. I jumped back in surprise. Thoughts raced through my head and I didn't know what to do. I looked at the stopcock. It was torn off. My right hand went up to scratch the back of my head, and then I remembered that I had a hat. I left it on the seat in the car I entered at the station. I hurried back to get my hat. On the way, I noticed that the stopcocks are broken everywhere. This only adds to the anxiety. But if I had known what was waiting for me on the way to my car, I would not have gone back at all. But I didn't know. In general, I overcome 3 cars in the direction of the tail. I go into the next one, and from the opposite end it enters the car. When I saw him, I froze right at the door. I was sweating and my legs almost buckled. An wheeze escaped from his throat. It was of enormous height and width and slowly walked towards me on huge bare feet. The shape of the legs were like human ones, only the size. The size of each foot was the size of a children's sled. One dusty lamp burned in the carriage. Like the moon, it illuminated a mystical picture that seemed to me a dream. The creature's huge arms, palms like excavator buckets, reached the floor. His fingers were as thick as my arm, and he had to stoop to walk the height of the carriage. A huge belly hung over his pants. This mutant was dressed in the uniform of a conductor, which was also huge in size, but bursting at the seams from the body bursting it. The uniform was dirty and tattered. A large, battered leather conductor's bag hung on a strap over his shoulder. But the most terrible thing was what was sitting on his shoulders. It was a huge bald head, covered in scars, without eyeballs, with eyelids sewn up with a mattress seam. The mouth was large enough to fit a medium-sized watermelon in its entirety. The monster walked slowly forward, feeling each seat with its hands. He carefully checked all the space in the car. He felt under the seats themselves, and even felt the luggage racks. At the same time, he muttered something inarticulate, snorted, grunted, and wheezed. Then the car shook, and my stupor passed. I quickly turned around and rushed back. I ran 10 cars, maybe 15, until the figure of a seated man flashed by to my right. My brain did not immediately react to this information, and my legs, out of fear, did not obey the order to stop, so I rushed to the vestibule, and there, by an effort of will, I was able to stop my legs. He turned around and looked at the man. The man was dozing at the window approximately in the middle of the car. I ran up to him to wake him up, and when I grabbed him by the shoulder, he woke up. "Let's run away from here, otherwise we'll be finished. There's a mutant," I shouted excitedly. "Ah, you met the conductor," the passenger grinned bitterly. I was somehow taken aback by his calmness. He opened his mouth to say something, but all the words in his head were completely confused. "Don't worry, sit down, I'll tell you everything now," the stranger suggested. His calm tone had an effect on me. My cottony legs bent, and I sat down opposite the interlocutor. And he continued. "There are 10 or 12 cars between us and the conductor. As you probably noticed, the conductor is blind and moves very slowly. It takes him about 20 minutes to feel the whole car, the vestibule, and squeeze into the next one. So, he will reach our car in 3 hours. So, I have time to somehow explain to you what is happening here." "What's going on here?" I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. "My name is Georgi Alexandrovich. You can simply Uncle Zora. I am a passenger of a ghost train, and now you are too." I caught my breath and saw the fellow traveler. He was 2 times older than me. He looked about 60 years old, intelligent, with a small graying beard, a slightly wrinkled dark hat on his head, and he was dressed in a dark coat, which also looked a little wrinkled. "Why did you call the train ghostly, and when will my station be?" I continued to ask, choosing the most pressing questions from those that swarm in my head. "Your station will not be. This train is in a different dimension relative to our world," Uncle Zora said sympathetically and continued. "It will be difficult for you to understand all this now, but I will try to explain. The situation is as follows. We are in a parallel dimension. This train sometimes stops at stations and picks up passengers. Moreover, it takes passengers from that dimension into this one, parallel. It is always only one passenger, and it is impossible to get out of it back into our world." "Like this?" I asked incredulously. "Look out the window. What do you see?" he said. "It's dark in there," I replied. "Exactly," my interlocutor confirmed. "It is always night in this world. And the train rushes through the endless winter taiga. On both sides are trees, endless coniferous ocean, and frost. I've been going for over a month now. Although, the concept of time here is very conditional. And outside the window, nothing changes. Only occasionally there are stations. Abandoned, deserted, in the middle of the endless taiga. And after the train makes a stop on them, a new passenger appears in it. At the last station, you entered it. Why didn't you get off the train at that moment?" I asked. "The one who leaves it remains at an abandoned station in the frosty taiga of this strange world. And he dies either from the cold or," here my interlocutor fell silent. "What either?" I whispered. "Did you see the conductor?" he asked. "So imagine what kind of monsters are found in this taiga. This train is like a check valve. It lets people from our world into its world, but I don't know how to get back." It all sounded like some kind of nonsense or an evil prank. "I got on the train tonight to get home, but I didn't know where. Communication is not working. I can't get out. But there must be some way out. Listen, if you go ahead along the movement of the train, then you can actually reach the electric locomotive, and there are the drivers. I began to reason. It's futile, my companion interrupted me. Firstly, I'm even afraid to imagine what the drivers look like here, and secondly, the train is endless, or rather, without beginning. How can this be? I wondered. Do not forget, my friend, we are in a different world. The laws of our world do not work here. I have been moving forward through the carriages for more than a month. The conductor adjusts. In general, she does not have a beginning, but she ends immediately after the conductor. When he passes the next car, it immediately disappears, as if it dissolves in the air. And who is this conductor? I asked. One of the natives of this world, he explained. This world is inhabited by mutants, each of which is imprisoned for a specific task. In addition to the conductor, there are road workers, cashiers at the station ticket offices, and even law enforcement officers. They are all extremely aggressive, and we are just food for them. I saw the conductor eat Herman. He grabbed it with his hand like a pie, first bit off the head, and then ate all of Herman without a trace. Until now, as I remember, my legs give way. What Herman? I breathed. Herman became a passenger a few days after me. Uncle Zora began to tell. I measure the day with my wristwatch, because there is no sun here. And then Herman had a theory that you can leave the train if you were behind the conductor. And Herman decided to hide under the seat, hoping that the conductor was blind and would not find him. But the conductor groped him. I tried to dissuade Herman, Uncle Zora lamented, but he did not listen to me. And I stood in the vestibule and watched. And when the conductor grabbed him, then this crunch of the skull. In general, a terrible sight. After what I saw, I probably ran 20 wagons. I still could not calm down. Still have goosebumps. Uncle Zora fell silent, and I didn't know what to say either. I tried to build some sane picture of what is happening to me. But it wasn't easy. My brain could not accommodate the beginningless electric train, could not understand how I got into another world and what to do with all this. You're not hungry? Uncle Zora asked in a fatherly way. His question pulled me out of the chaos of my thoughts, and I felt that I was brutally hungry. Yes, there are a few. I hesitated. Uncle Zora pulled out a sports bag from under the bench and began to extract bundles from it. Here's the chicken in foil, bread, tomatoes, cucumber, and a half soda, he listed. Where do you get your food from? I was surprised. You've been here for a long time. This is another oddity of this train, he began to explain, turning the chicken around. The fact is that moving along the cars, we find in some of them different bags with food and water. They look as if the passenger got off at his station and forgot his luggage. And where these bags really come from, we do not know. It seems that someone does not want us to die of hunger here. Are there other passengers besides us? I asked while chewing the chicken. Yes, Lek and Sergei. But they have gone far ahead. Lek somehow found a note saying that the train has a portal through which you can return to our world. An unknown passenger explained in it that this portal constantly moves forward through the cars. It is somehow synchronized with the conductor and is always ahead of him by 1,000 cars. So they went to look for him. It seems to them that they will find a way out, slicing tomatoes and bread, Uncle Zora said. But I think there is no portal, so I'm in no hurry. A huge moon hung in the sky outside the windows, illuminating the boundless taiga with a pale ashy light. The wheels, like the hooves of some mythical horse, rhythmically pounded on the railway. Two people in the semi-darkness were eating a chicken in an empty car of a strange electric train without a start, which was rushing no one knows where through the expanses of an incomprehensible world. It's hard to imagine a more mystical picture, I thought, crunching a cucumber. It's time for us to move out, Uncle Zora said, glancing at his watch. The conductor will be here soon. By the way, you never introduced yourself, young man. What is your name? He continued. Valera. And you, I answered. Very nice, he grunted, standing up. Come on, Valera, Get out of here before the conductor comes. Uncle Zora took his bag and we walked along the empty cars away from the conductor. Count the cars past, and I will count, then we will compare. He turned to me. And I began to bend my fingers, passing the next car. We passed 7 cars, and in front of the door of the 8th, Uncle Zora stopped abruptly and raised his hand. I understood his gesture and also froze. A second later, he pointed his finger into the twilight space of the car in front of us. I looked up and saw a man lying on the floor. He was lying between the rows of seats, with his feet toward us, and something white was clutched in his right palm. The man did not move, and only the train shook him from side to side. From time to time, Uncle Zora began to whisper, "The train presents passengers with a wagon with a surprise." Surprises are different, but, as a rule, always deadly. As if an evil experimenter is conducting dangerous experiments on us. At these times, you have to be extremely careful. "What do we do?" I whispered. "You stay here, and I'll go take a look," Uncle Zora commanded quietly. He lowered his bag to the floor, slowly opened the car doors just enough to squeeze in sideways, and stalked towards the figure on the floor. I, ready at any moment to come to his aid, remained to watch. Creeping up to the one lying on the floor, he leaned over, then touched him with his hand, and a second later abruptly recoiled and sat down on the seat next to him. Then he gestured to me. I approached cautiously. "This is Sergei," Uncle Zora said mournfully. "He's dead." He leaned over and pulled a piece of paper out of Sergei's palm. It was a note from Lyoka. "I still don't understand what happened," Lyoka wrote in his note. "Sergei said that he wanted, to take a piss and stayed in the vestibule, and I went to the next car. Waited for him for 10 minutes, then followed him. And he is not. Went back 3 more cars. Empty. I thought that he decided to return to you and did not look for him anymore. I moved forward in search of a portal, and after 14 cars I see him on the floor, dead. No signs of violence. But how did he get ahead of me? Almost 10 wagons. Uncle Zora, be careful. Damn, what do we do with the corpse now? There is no place to bury. And so it seems uncomfortable to leave. Can we burn it? Cremation is like a funeral, I suggested, and let the whole car burn down to a fucking hairdryer. What do we have to lose? In no case. Don't you dare set fire to anything. Uncle Zora got excited. We have already tried to burn the car. We thought we would set it on fire right in front of the conductor, and if the conductor burns in it, then we will fall into our dimension. Yes, it was not there. As soon as the fire from the seats began to be built, a fireman immediately appeared. Somewhere in the vestibule materialized from the side of the conductor. A monster, I'll tell you, no worse than a conductor, only sighted and wearing a helmet. Moreover, he has a hook and a fire extinguisher. We almost put down our bricks when we saw him. And he put out the fire from the fire extinguisher, hook at the ready and running after us. Roars like a wounded bull. The doors between the carriages are kicked open. I don't know how many wagons we ran from him. And when I felt exhausted, I thought, "Granty me." But he disappeared as suddenly as he appeared. In general, I do not advise pampering here with fire. Yes, here I see you won't spoil much. I was impressed by the story. Whose baggage is this? I pointed to a dark backpack on the floor under one of the seats. I don't know, let's take a look, Uncle Zora suggested. I put the backpack on the seat, opened the zipper, and we began to examine the contents. It contained several boiled eggs, sliced raw smoked sausage, some bread, a couple of apples, and a thermos of hot tea. In the inner pocket of the backpack, we found some money, about 2,000 rubles, some checks, keys, and a ticket for this train. And then, at the sight of this ticket, I had an idea. Uncle, sure, because the conductor requires a ticket, but let's try to present this ticket to him. After all, then we will find ourselves on the other side of the conductor and will be able to get into our world. Well, first of all, we have only one ticket, Uncle Zora began to argue. Second, it's dangerous. What if the conductor doesn't like it? He and Surname will not ask. It would be necessary to start somehow experimenting with this ticket, but at a safe distance, and then we both looked at Sergei's body. After all, when the conductor finds him on the floor in Stowaway, he will gobble him up in any way, but we still can't hide him anywhere. Let's put Seryoga on this seat and put this ticket in his hand, and we'll see for ourselves what the conductor will do, suggested Uncle Zora. I silently nodded. So we did. Seryoga looked like a sleeping passenger. We seated him by the window, facing the tail of the train right at the entrance to the car. In his right hand was a ticket found in a backpack. Uncle Zora and I went to the front of the carriage and began to wait for the conductor, passing the time by talking. Uncle Zora, why was all the food in the backpack fresh and even the tea in the thermos hot? I asked. It's always like this on this train. All the luggage we found in it looks like it was just forgotten by some absent-minded passenger, he replied. Damn. I feel like some kind of rabbit that is being experimented on and fed so that I don't die of hunger, I lamented. I would like to know who this evil genius is, who is mocking us like that. Yes, there is no genius, it's just that a person knows little even about the world in which he lives, said Uncle Zora. And what can we say about the laws that reign in the neighboring worlds? You have to be able to adapt, he continued. We must try to understand what is going on here. Understand the rules of the game, so to speak. And then we might find a way out. Some time passed, and we heard the slamming of doors between the cars and realized that the conductor had reached our car. It was very unpleasant and scary to be in the same carriage with him. Therefore, Uncle Zora and I went out into the vestibule and began to observe what was happening through the glass of closed doors. It was so calm. We saw how the conductor, muttering some kind of nonsense, squeezed into the car and began to carefully probe the whole space. He ran his hand along the seat where Seryoga's body was sitting and felt for his hand with the ticket. He carefully took the ticket, then took out some kind of apparatus from his bag, put the ticket into it. The red light on the machine lit up and a long unpleasant sound was heard. The conductor began to shout excitedly, grabbed poor Sergino's body and bit off his head in one fell swoop. I vomited right on the glass through which we watched. Uncle Zora grabbed my hand and began to lead me away from the conductor. The experiment failed. The conductor's apparatus does not recognize tickets from our world. We were overcome with despair mixed with disappointment. And besides, fear urged us to get as far away from the conductor as possible. At first we walked very fast. The wagons were not counted. But then fatigue took over, and we made a halt. The cars were different. Some were old, dirty, and rusty. They smelled bad, and they did not want to stop. Others looked fairly new and clean. We sat down in one of these. Let's have a cup of tea, Valerie, croaked out of breath Uncle Zora, taking out of the bag the thermos that we found in the backpack and a couple of some sweets. The lid of the thermos also served as a glass, and a plastic bowl was enclosed in it. Thus, the thermos was designed for 2 persons. I drank from a lid glass, and Uncle Zora from a bowl. Uncle Zora, you were talking about some law enforcement officers, is that the local police? Yeah, sort of, he said, sipping his tea. I didn't see them myself, like God told me, he appeared here before me. So, there were 3 of their passengers, Lyoka himself, Seryoga and Stasik, a semi-homeless person. Stasik lived here long before Lyoka and Seryoga. They say he liked it here. In our world, he didn't have housing, but here food is free, and a roof over his head. He even managed to make brew here from various fruits and sweets, which he got in bags. One day they found a note, and it says that the outfit can be called into the car if you press the call button and, ignoring the noise, shout the phrase, "We have an emergency in the car." And then it was said that, they say, it's better not to do this, because 2 guards will appear and drag off the first person who comes to hand with them, and you won't see him again. and then it is useless to resist. Their strength is incredible, and they look so that their knees give way. When Lyoka read the note aloud, Stasik began to laugh and show off. Say, it's all nonsense about the attendants. I pressed these buttons 100 times and did not see anyone. Stasik was heavily under the fly from his brew, and he began to swear loudly. They say, in the coffin he saw all the cops, that he would smear them all with one left. And everything in this spirit. Then, according to Lyoka's story, Stasik ran up to the button, pressed it and yelled, "We have an emergency in the car." The screeching and hissing came from the speakers. But Stasik didn't care. He yelled at the top of his lungs, "We have an emergency in the car." Lex said that he and Seryoga wanted to pull him away from the button. But then it happened that they, as if rooted to the spot, remained in place. Two people broke in from the vestibule. One hefty to the ceiling, the other to his waist. Scarred faces. On both, the remains of the form. Blue shirts shabby with brown spots. The big man has such hands that even the sleeves have burst. Both are barefoot, but with epaulets. They growl like bears. The eyes are red and furious. They grabbed Stasik and started to beat him up, knocked out all his teeth, smashed his face into blood. Then they tied me up, handcuffed me and dragged me by the legs to where they came from. Lex said that he and Seryoga were numb from what they saw. For a long time they were afraid to go further along the wagons. But the conductor urged on from behind, and they had to continue moving. They had not seen Stasik since then, and the bloody trail from him was interrupted in the passage between the cars. It's like all three of them just melted away. "Serious business," I mumbled, not knowing what to say. Here we noticed that the train began to slow down. "It looks like there will be a station," Uncle Zora said thoughtfully, looking out the window. "And possibly another passenger." "Well, aren't there passengers at every station?" I was surprised. "No," he replied. "Sometimes the train stands at the station for a long time, as if waiting for its prey. But far from always she manages to snatch another poor fellow from our world. What if we get off at the station and dissuade the passenger from entering?" I blurted out. "You are naive, Valera. You will not see the passenger. Do not forget, we are with them in different realities. He is at the station in our home world. And we are with you, do not understand where." Meanwhile, the train crept stealthily to the station and finally stopped. The doors hissed and clanged open. Something unintelligible grunted from the speakers. The station was a 2-story building with broken, dark windows. A pair of dim lanterns illuminated the empty, nighttime platform. In the wall of the building one could see the only unbroken and barred window, in which the light burned dimly, and above it the letters KS could be seen. Then the letters either fell off, or they never existed. But it was clear that this was the box office. The atmosphere of desolation and twilight was downright mystical. "May I go out to investigate?" I asked. "Can. Only when you hear a voice from the speakers, then immediately go into the car. Otherwise, you will stay here forever." "What's in the building?" I didn't let up. "Better not stick your head in there," Uncle Zora warned. "There are such creatures that you will not be happy. By the way, if you see anyone on the street, run as fast as you can into the car. They usually don't come here. It seems like they're not supposed to. But if caught on the street, they will eat it. Enough to aggravate Uncle Shur. I'm scared to go out now." "And then," Uncle Zora said pointedly, "I never go out myself." An eternal frosty night hung over this strange world. But I still decided to get out of the car, because I had a plan. I decided to go to the ticket office and try to buy a ticket. Coming out of the car, I felt a strong frost. Strangely, there was no snow anywhere. I just now drew attention to it. Looking around, I saw from both sides, woods and wagons going into the darkness. Is it really infinite? I thought, slowly moving towards the checkout. The checkout window was cloudy, but the cashier's silhouette was visible behind the dusty glass. It was impossible to see in detail the inhabitant of the ticket office, and I didn't really want to. At the bottom of the window, I saw a rusty tray extended out into the street. Throwing $500 there, I pushed it into the box office and said, "2 tickets," while pointing 2 fingers out the window, in case I was hard to hear at the box office. The silhouette in the window began to fuss, and suddenly the tray with $500 was kicked back, and from behind the window came an inarticulate roar and some kind of swearing. I jumped back in surprise. The heart was pounding. I looked at the doorway in the building. I was uneasy at the thought that one of its inhabitants would hear the noise and come out onto the platform. But everything worked out. Carefully taking my $500 from the tray, I turned my head towards the car. And I saw some movement. Creeping closer, I saw the outline of a figure under the car, or rather, only its rear part. Standing on all fours and sticking his head under the car, there was some huge guy in a dirty orange waistcoat. Next to him on the platform lay a hammer and some other tool. Under the car, his dissatisfied grumbling and metal tapping could be heard. Probably he was fixing some kind of breakdown in the lower part of the car. Probably the local mechanic. And as soon as he did not notice me, I thought with horror. I wanted to urgently dive into the car until the mechanic spotted me. But then I saw that the red crust of the certificate was sticking out of the back pocket of his dirty trousers. Probably this is a railroad worker's ID, flashed through my head, and a plan immediately matured. I crept up behind the rear of the mechanic, abruptly snatched an identity card from his pocket and rushed to the doors of the car. His reaction was simply bestial, and he immediately rushed after me with a roar. Having lost precious seconds to climb the iron steps of the car, I already felt in the vestibule that the mutant was catching up with me. Pushing the doors to the carriage on the left, where Uncle Zora was waiting for me, I rushed towards the tail of the train. Before the doors closed behind me, I felt the mechanic grab my leg. Collapsed to the floor, I was able to grab the leg of the first seat. Standing on the platform, the mechanic reached out with his incredibly long arms to me, and this despite the fact that I was already in the car. Uncle Zora, with a frightened face, rushed to my aid. He grabbed my clothes and began to pull me into the car with all his might. The situation became a stalemate. From the side of the tail of the train, the conductor was inevitably approaching us, and, without exaggeration, the hydraulic hand of the mechanic was pulling me forward. The forces were not equal, and Uncle Zora and I understood that the mechanic would now pull me out of the car like a cork from a bottle. We resisted with the last of our strength. Uncle Zora shouted at me to hold on, but my hand unbent my numb fingers one by one. We looked at each other in horror and mentally said goodbye. Suddenly I remembered about the emergency call button of the outfit. With some incredible effort, I reached out to her and, pressing, yelled at the top of my lungs, "Emergency INRCR. P in our car." And then the real horror began. An outfit of 2 mutants burst into the vestibule, and the first person who got under their arm was a mechanic who invaded the train up to the waist and dragged me out of the car by the leg. A second later I heard the crunch of broken bones and the mechanic's wild scream. A bloodbath began in the vestibule. The car jumped as if a herd of elephants were dancing on its roof. These 2 goblins dragged the mechanic into the vestibule and simply took it apart for parts. The growling and screaming at the same time were of such force that it was pawned in the ears. Uncle Zora, out of breath, pulled me into the middle of the car. Turning around, I saw that the torn-off hand of the mechanic was still holding my leg and was dragging behind me, leaving a trail of blood. And the rest of it flew along the vestibule under the blows of the attendants, breaking the windows and the car doors. We were dumbfounded as we watched what was happening. Suddenly the mechanic stopped, and through the broken windows we saw how these 2 were busily dragging his remains into the passage between the cars. Exhausted, we sat on the floor of the car. An inarticulate but expressive announcement was heard again from the speakers. The train has closed the doors and continued its endless journey through the expanses of a strange world. "Valera, what the hell are you hooking this mutant?" Panting, Uncle Zora croaked angrily. I took a freshly stolen ID out of my pocket and gave it to Uncle Zora. "Well, what is it for you?" He continued, holding onto his heart. "I'll show it to the ticket office and get a couple of local tickets so we can get off this damn train," I panted. "The theory, of course, is interesting, colleague," he quipped. "Only because of this you almost got your head torn off." "All right, Uncle Zora." It all worked out. "But now, at the next station, I'll get tickets for us." "I'm already afraid to imagine what it will look like," he continued to taunt, returning the crust to me. I, grinning, opened the ID to see this trophy. It was as caricatured as everything else in this incomprehensible world. Even lines consisted of a mixture of Cyrillic and Latin letters. Upper and lower case were in random order. It was impossible to read anything, but everything was serious, even a photograph of the owner with a large round seal. The wrinkled face in the photo was disgusting. Eyes, one of which was higher than the other, expressed a complete lack of intelligence. The lipless mouth showed large, yellow horse teeth. 2 slits instead of a nose and huge ears completed the picture. "Uncle Zora, do you think the cashier will notice that it's not me in the photo?" "Drop it. You are just like twins. Just one face." He laughed hoarsely. After this joke, we definitely could not get up from the floor. Adrenaline left the vessels of our bodies, and we were covered with nervous laughter. We laughed to colic, to tears rolling on the floor. As we laughed, I tried to free my leg from the mechanic's grasping hand. But it turned out to be difficult. The grip of his fingers was literally dead. His arm was pulled right out of his shoulder, 2 meters long and very weighty. It hung on my leg like a weight. Apparently, the spasm closed the huge fingers with an iron grip, and the dead hand did not want to let go of my leg. "Cut the tendons," Uncle Zora said, holding out his knife to me. I took a knife and began to cut the back of the dead hand. The fingers began to loosen one by one, and I was finally able to free my leg. In the semi-darkness of the car, on the floor lay a huge hand of a mechanic. Her hand, like a predatory spider, swayed in time with the movement of the train, and we wanted to leave this car as soon as possible. It seemed that now the hand would come to life and grab someone's throat. "Uncle Zora, let's get out of here," I suggested, painfully reluctant to wait for the conductor. He silently took his bag, and we, carefully bypassing the hand, went to the vestibule. Opening the doors, we saw a nightmarish picture. The vestibule was all covered in the mechanic's blood. It was dripping from the ceiling, flowing from the walls, and on the floor there were broken teeth, some kind of bloody lumps, and a huge eye. Shards of broken glass crunched underfoot. There were dents on the walls and doors from blows. What we saw chilled us to the bone. We were afraid to move on. What if these two were waiting for us in the next vestibule? Uncle Zora entered the passage between the cars. The blood trail broke off there. He slightly opened the door of the vestibule of the neighboring car. It was empty there. There is nothing suspicious in the car either. "Valerie, we need to go through 10 or 12 cars so that we can have a quiet snack and take a nap," Uncle Zora said without stopping. "Not a problem," I answered, limping. After the mechanic's iron grip, my leg ached, but I was ready to endure, just to get away from that bloody car and the approaching conductor. After passing 3 cars, we found a large plastic bag and a handbag. The package contained expensive sausage, cognac, 1.5 shots of cola, fruit, chocolate, and a jar of olives. A pink handbag lay next to her, and on a label of 3 Latin letters gleamed with rhinestones, NGA inside, a standard ladies' set. Nothing interesting, except for the stun gun, which we took with us. Uncle Zora transferred the found products to his bag, and we moved on. After another 9 cars, we decided to make a halt. We got food and arranged a small feast with cognac. Then fatigue took its toll, and we dozed off. I woke up from the fact that Uncle Zora was shaking my shoulder. "What happened, Uncle Zora?" I jumped up. "The train has stopped," he said. "Another station." I looked out the window. In the dark, on an empty platform, stood a concrete checkout booth and a couple of broken benches under a rusty canopy. All this night landscape was illuminated by a barely living lantern on a pole. The cash register window flickered faintly, as if a candle was burning there or an electric lamp had a bad connection. I stepped onto the platform and breathed in the frosty air. Uncle Zora stood in the vestibule and watched me. "Uncle Zora, why is there no snow here?" I asked softly from the platform. "It's winter outside, it seems." "I don't know," he replied. "For as long as I've been driving here, I've never seen snow." After looking around, I slowly walked over to the cash register window, put the identity card stolen from the mechanic and $500 into the rusty tray. With a creak, he pushed the tray into the bowels of the cash register. And he said loudly, "2 tickets," while showing 2 fingers through the window. Behind the cloudy glass, a rather large shadow moved. There was an indistinct muttering, and after a few seconds the tray popped out. It contained a certificate, my 502 tickets made of thick cardboard. At that moment, an inarticulate announcement was heard from the loudspeakers, and I realized that the train was about to move. Taking with me everything that was in the tray, I rushed into the car and barely jumped into the vestibule when the doors closed. "Well?" Uncle Zora said impatiently. I handed him 1 ticket. "Awesome," Uncle Zora issued, carefully picking up a small cardboard with a seal and a series of random letters. "It's local tickets," he continued. "Yes. This one is yours, and this one is mine," I showed my ticket. "And they got it for free." Apparently, 1 certificate is enough. The train, meanwhile, was picking up speed, and we went into the car and sat on the sofa. "Uncle Zora, let's wait for the conductor, and I'll stand in the aisle and show him a ticket. You will also be standing a little behind me in the aisle, so to speak, at a low start. If suddenly this mutant does not like the ticket, then we will have a chance to run away from him. Well, if everything goes well, then after that you present your ticket to him." "Good plan," Uncle Zora nodded approvingly. "Only I feel sorry for Lek," I continued. "Will he stay here forever?" "We still can't catch up with him, he's gone far ahead," Uncle Zora answered. "She and Sergei chose their own path. Sergei died, and I'm not sure if Lyoka is alive now. And you and I got a chance. It's risky, but we have to check it." "Uncle Zora, what's going on behind the conductor? Why do the cars disappear behind him?" "Yes, I don't really know. Maybe the car itself becomes a kind of portal through which you can get into our world. We did not want to leave this car. It seemed that it brings good luck, and it is in it that our tickets will be happy." After some time, we heard the slam of the door in the vestibule and saw the conductor. He could hardly squeeze through the door of the car. His inarticulate muttering inspired some kind of quiet horror. I wanted to run away immediately. But having mastered myself, I took a stun gun from Uncle Zora just in case and went into the middle of the car. Holding out the ticket in my hand, I stood ready to run away from here in case of failure. Uncle Zora stood about 5 paces behind me in the same readiness to leave the car. We understood that the conductor would not run after us, but his inhuman reaction and long arms buckets made us be on the alert. Feeling the space of the car, he slowly approached me. In his mutterings, I made out several times the phrase, "Show me the ticket." Finally, he found my outstretched hand with the ticket, carefully took it and reached into the bag for his control apparatus. My heart was pounding at a frightening rate. I clutched the stun gun in my hand and prepared to jump back if a nasty buzzer began to wail in his apparatus. Taking out his strange typewriter, he slipped my ticket into it. The machine purred with satisfaction, squeaked briefly, and the green light on it lit up. The conductor took my ticket out of the machine and, muttering the word order, handed the whole ticket to me. I took the ticket and sat down on the seat. The conductor, feeling the car, moved on to Uncle Zora. Uncle Zora, seeing that the tickets were suitable, calmed down a little and also sat down on the sofa. I watched what was happening from behind this mutant, but I was afraid to utter even a word so as not to frighten off Luck. Uncle Zora, like me, successfully passed the control, and the conductor began to squeeze into the vestibule, feeling which he climbed into the next car. For a while, Uncle Zora and I sat in our seats, as if dumbfounded and could not figure out what to do next. Our carriage did not disappear anywhere, nothing changed, the train continued to travel through the night taiga. Then Uncle Zora got up and silently approached me. He looked at me, and I looked at him. "What's next?" For some reason I whispered. "I don't know," he replied. "Let's check the previous car, maybe it's gone?" I suggested. And we went to check. When we entered the vestibule of the neighboring car and made sure that it had not disappeared, we froze in surprise. The light was on in the car, and there were people in it. The second wave of stupor covered me and Uncle Zora. We stood in silence, as if rooted to the spot in the vestibule, and through the glass in the door looked at the passengers. There were few of them. A young couple with a girl running around the car, a serious man with a briefcase, and two grannies talking animatedly. I don't know how long we stood like that, but Uncle Zora was the first to come to his senses. "I don't understand," he said drawlingly. "Are we back? Why didn't our car disappear?" It was obvious that a lot of questions were swarming in his head. His face expressed some distrust of what was happening, as if he suspected that all this was some kind of another experiment and the passengers in the car were not real. Then he slowly turned around and went to our car, opened the doors to the vestibule, and we saw that the light was on there too, and passengers were riding. Just a minute ago it was an empty and dark wagon of a ghost train, and now there are passengers. They drive like nothing happened. "Valera, our carriage is gone." "Instead, another one?" "Well, yes," I replied. "It turns out that this is how it happens. You have to go to another car to get into our world." Uncle Zora stepped into the car. I followed him. We walked slowly down the aisle, looking at the passengers, then into another carriage, then into a third. Staring at people, we looked ridiculous, and, probably, everyone took us for some kind of crazy bums. We gradually realized that we managed to escape from the terrible world of the ghost train. The people around were real. Everyone went about their business. Uncle Zora turned to me, tears in his eyes. Apparently, in that dark world, he lost faith that he could ever return. "We made it," he said, and hugged me like a father. I also wrapped my arms around him. We were overwhelmed by a wave of joy. Our legs became wadded, and we sat down on the seat. Our faces shone with happiness. And the train began to slow down, and a woman's voice announced that the stop was called the 666th kilometer and that the next station was Liski. At that time, we still didn't know where we were because each of us entered the ghost train from different cities, but apparently it was possible to get out of it only here, on the platform of the 666th kilometer. This is where the return portal was. It was still dark outside, but it was clearly a different train, and now we knew where we were going. This was our world. If you liked the video, leave a like and subscribe to our channel for more.